Hi everyone, welcome to the introduction video for Live FX and Live FX Studio. This video should be the first one to watch if you're new to Live FX, no matter if you're only interested in it for either green screen production, virtual production, or image-based lighting. This video will show you how the software is built up, what to find where, and how to navigate your way through the different modules. No worries though, it's pretty straightforward. In this video, we'll go over the following topics. Starting out with the startup screen and the most important settings: system settings, video I/O settings, user settings, and project settings. Then entering a project and going through the individual modules inside: the Construct tab, Live FX tab, and Stage Lights tab. If you're looking for a specific portion, please use the chapter markers in the description of this video to jump directly to that part. Let's start on the startup screen. On the far right side, you'll find two very important buttons. First is the Logfiles button, which will take you to the Logfiles. Whenever there's a problem and you email support, it's wise to include the log file of the session where the problem occurred. Assimilate.log is the one of the ongoing or last session if you already closed Live FX. Assimilate.1.log is from the session before, and so on, Assimilate.10.log being the oldest from 10 sessions back. Some of the information in the log file, such as what hardware and Live FX build you have, can also be found by simply clicking onto the Assimilate logo right here. The other important button is the license menu. In here, you can activate and deactivate a license key in order to move it to a different workstation if need be. Note that in order to deactivate a key, it first needs to get unlocked inside your MyAssimilate account. After activating the key on a new machine, you can then decide whether you want to lock it again or leave it unlocked if you need to move it more frequently. Let's look at the various settings here in Live FX, starting with the system settings. In here we can, for instance, set the default location for projects. You can set this folder to a shared storage if you have a multi-node setup. This way, the main machine can open the project with write permissions and all other systems with read access only. Note that for this, a proper file locking mechanism on the shared storage is required. Another important setting is the dual head over here. This enables a second GPU output for the image to be sent to an LED processor or monitor. In case you need to send video to multiple GPU outputs, an NVIDIA Mosaic setup is required, which will then be used as the designated dual head output. The other very important tab in here is the Advanced Settings tab. Normally, you only need to go in here if something is not working the way it should. Let's move on to the Video I/O settings. In here, you can configure any Video I/O output. Live FX supports AJA, Bluefish 444, and Blackmagic hardware. Next to that, anything that identifies like a webcam to the operating system, and NDI. You can select the device up here and enable it. Down here, you can select output resolution and frame rate, as well as the number of video input and output channels. Note that when playing back content from Live FX, it will always run as fast as the Video I/O config. Meaning, if you change to 60 FPS content, but your Video I/O is still set to 24 FPS, you will see that Live FX will not play any faster than 24 FPS. In those cases, see this menu to double check whether you have set the wrong frame rate here. Another important thing to keep in mind is that dual head output straight from the GPU provides less latency than going through Video I/O. With Video I/O outputs, Live FX has to necessarily buffer a couple of frames, usually between 4 and 6, before outputting. This buffering is not necessary when going directly out of the GPU to the LED processor, and hence provides a lower motion to photon delay. On to user settings. They mainly control the look and feel of Live FX. The three most important settings in here are these: the control gearing with normal and shift thresholds. Changing a numeric parameter is done by clicking into it and then dialing around it, just like turning a virtual encoder knob. The speed in which the parameter changes is determined by the normal gearing. If you hold down Shift, you can slow it down and dial in values more accurately, according to the shift gearing speed. Next, you can choose whether to use the default circular gesture to dial in these parameters. I'd recommend this if you're using Live FX with pen and tablet, or otherwise you can revert to vertical or horizontal dragging. Lastly, Live FX features swipeable menus to the left and right borders of the UI once inside the project. It is a very convenient feature to quickly bring up or hide these menus simply by hitting the screen edge with the cursor. However, it can happen that you accidentally swipe them in or out, and if that happens too often, you can set the swipe sensitivity to low or off and trigger those menus with hotkeys Q and W. Lastly, project settings. On the left side, we have certain project paths. The most important one is the media directory. All other paths are actually subfolders of the media directory. While you can of course import footage from anywhere, it is best practice to first copy all footage into the designated media directory, or point the media directory to where the footage is located. The reason for doing this is that you can easier move a project to a different machine without having to manually relink media. On the new machine, you would simply point Live FX to the path where the media directory is, and it will find all the media inside automatically. The same accounts for a multi-node workflow where all systems read from the same project database and expect media paths to match between nodes. Next are the default image format settings over here. Essentially, these settings are defaults for freshly created timelines inside a project. However, Live FX will never nail you to a specific setting. You can change the settings of any timeline at any point. But if you set the parameters here, for instance, to UHD with 24 FPS, any new created timeline inside the project will have these dimensions and frame rate from the start. That being said, most of the time you will be working shot-based in Live FX outside of a timeline context, so these settings matter even less. At long last, let's enter a fresh project. Once inside, the main navigation is via the 3 tabs at the bottom here. In the Construct tab, you can import, export, and organize media. The Live FX tab, momentarily grayed out as we have not imported any media yet, is about anything to do with the picture. And the Stage Lights tab lets you take care of, well, your stage lighting. When starting a fresh project, you will likely start with either the Live Setup button or the Import Clips button. Starting a live setup is pretty straightforward. The setup wizard gives you a couple of presets, but in many cases, particularly for image-based lighting, it is enough to just start a basic capture using the capture device and input channel you enabled in the Video I/O settings that we looked at earlier. Hit the Create button and Live FX will automatically enter the Live FX tab with the just created shot. Right now we are seeing a checkerboard pattern which indicates that there is no image stream coming in. So let's go back to the Construct tab, delete the just created live capture node, and import some footage from disk. If I open the Formats dropdown, you can see that Live FX supports a ton of formats, including several camera RAW formats. So if your DOP of choice shows up with a hard drive full of camera RAW footage on the day of the shoot, there's a good chance Live FX can simply play it, or at least transcode it to ProRes, NotchLC, and other formats really fast. Let's import a couple of 360 shots. Since I want to import a whole folder, I'll enable the Select Folder option over here. Hit Open and the clips will appear on your timeline. Now, as mentioned earlier, Live FX has swipeable left and right side menus. On the right, you can see the metadata stack, which allows to quickly inspect any metadata of the selected clip. On the left side, we have the project tree, which lists our timelines and groups thereof. We can add timelines like this, and as you can see down here, they are all created with the default dimensions and frame rate as set in the project settings. But we can also grab a few clips from our first timeline, and with those clips attached to the cursor, create new timelines and eventually drop the clips in somewhere. Via the Edit button, we can mark timelines to delete, or rename them, or create and rename new groups. Now, over here on the left side is an important setting, the player mode. By default, it is set to single shot, meaning no matter whether we double-click any of the shots or simply switch to the Live FX tab, Live FX will only play this single shot by itself. Once we switch to timeline, we can not only dial in the settings for the timeline, but as you will see, when entering the Live FX tab, we now have a mini timeline up here. To set playback to only loop a single shot, we can simply hit the range button over here. As you can see, our timeline dimensions are too small for the clip. To change them really quickly to the clip's dimensions, we can just go back to the Construct tab, grab one of the clips, and drop it right here on the label in the lower right corner of the screen. Done. Two things left to check before we move on to the Live FX tab. First is the Media Browser, which you can open up over here. The Media Browser is your friend whenever you need to change a property for multiple clips at once. Without going too much into detail, in the Base tab we can batch change the clip naming inside Live FX based on metadata or certain metadata flags. The Grade tab allows us to batch load lookup tables and grades. In the Files tab we can manually relink any footage from outside the media directory, and so on. Any change in here always applies to the selected number of clips. The last thing I want to show you is the toolset switch. With Live FX Studio you will also have the option to switch to the finishing toolset. As you can see, this gives you an Edit and a Render tab. The Edit tab allows you to easily trim clips, apply dissolves between them, and do rudimentary editing as you see fit. The edited timeline can then obviously be used as is for virtual production once you switch back to the Live FX toolset. The Render tab is a much more elaborate way of rendering media from any given timeline than the tiny little render menu we have in the Live FX toolset. In the Render tab we start with the main output node, which represents our timeline in terms of resolution, frame rate, and aspect. And from there on out we can build a node tree, for instance with a transformer node that changes the resolution and an encoder node, for instance to Notch LC. That renders the content to file. On this topic we have a separate tutorial. Back to the Live FX toolset. Other options we have in here are the ability to create certain fillers like color frames, set up switcher nodes, render out content, or calibrate our LED wall to our camera using our OpenVPCal implementation. Before we cover the projection setup menu, let me first give you a more basic idea about the Live FX tab. For that, let's just enter the Live FX tab with this single shot by double-clicking it. Let me start with the two most important hotkeys in here. Alt-drag up and down to scale the viewport, and space-drag to position the image. Next, let's continue with some items from the top menu bar, like our scopes to help judge the image. Note that the scopes do require some hardware resources, as they analyze each and every pixel of the frame. For playback, when the camera is rolling, it's recommended to disable the scopes if the underlying hardware does not allow for too much headroom. Next, you can access the layer stack, which you can also trigger by swiping to the left or using hotkey Q. The memories allow you to quickly save and recall grades, and in the Tools dropdown you can access our Sync Players feature to link multiple Live FX nodes together, or the Live Links panel. In our case, we can see the incoming tracking info from our Intel RealSense tracker here, which can be live linked to the shot camera, which we can see in the camera menu down here. More on that in just a bit. To the right, we have the version stack. Versions can be anything, like the same shot, but with a different grade, for instance. Let's do this real quick and add some red to this shot, hit the Add Version button, and add some green to it. I can now switch back and forth between these two versions. I can also compare them in dual view mode by hitting this button or hotkey D. While the left side will always show the current shot, I can drop into the right side whatever I want, for instance my red version. It's important that you do not click the red version, making it the current shot to be displayed on the left, but rather drag it. If I hit this button down here or hotkey S, I can enter split view with a white bar to go back and forth. Let's go back to the Construct tab for a second. As you can see, I have my two versions in their respective slot here as well. But I can also add any other clip to that slot, like this. Going back into the Live FX tab, I can now also quickly jump to an entirely different shot. The right side stack has a few tabs more down here. One is for the metadata of the current shot. I have access to scene and take metadata, projection metadata, custom nodes, and more. The next tab is the node tree, which right now only shows a single node, our QuickTime file reader node. We'll get back to the node tree later in this video. Let's look at the layer stack and grading tools again. Layers grow from top to bottom, meaning that layer 3 is actually the topmost layer right now. Any layer can contain any or all of the grading tools down here. As you can see, you got all the tools you know from Post: lift, gamma, gain, curves, vectors, lookup tables, as well as secondaries like power windows and keyers, all working in real time. But a layer cannot only contain a grade, it can also hold a texture like compositing elements, lower thirds, or plugins. Going to the Fill Matte menu, we can see that each layer has two inputs, Fill and Matte. If I right-click, I can import another clip or fetch a clip from anywhere inside the project, like this. Now that the clip is attached to the cursor, I can drop it into the Fill field here. The parameters to the right apply to either Fill or Matte, depending on which field or tab I have selected here. As you can see, this is just one image on top of another if I enable and disable the layer. By adjusting the canvas size or position, I can move it around. Changing the corresponding parameters in the Fill Matte menu allow me to scale and position the texture inside the canvas, or change the blend mode. Instead of a clip, I can also load a plugin onto a layer. Let's do that real quick. Go to Plugins, choose either one of the Assimilate plugin nodes or one of the various Matchbox shaders. Note that you can also write your own shaders and add them to the collection if need be. You can then decide whether to add the plugin onto the selected layer or as a new node on top. Let's go for the layer option. Once added, we can find the parameters of the plugin here in the node menu. The node menu is dynamically labeled and its contents depend on the underlying node. Let me explain what this means. If we select the primary layer in the layer stack, or if no layer is selected, the node menu shows the settings of the underlying node, which in our case is a simple QuickTime file reader node. The options for decoding a QuickTime file are fairly limited. Had we imported a RedRAW or ARRIRAW file, we would see all the debugging options for those file types. Now, if I select a layer with a plugin on it, the node menu will show the parameters of the fill for that layer, the plugin in other words, and also its label will change accordingly. If a layer does only contain a grade, the node menu will be empty. To illustrate this even further, let's look at the node tree in the right side stack. Here you can see the QuickTime File Reader node and the plugin node, as well as the other clip we added earlier, feeding onto layers of the QuickTime node. As you can tell, the flow of data in the node tree goes from bottom to top. In here, you can also scale using Alt drag and space drag to pan. To give a bit more screen real estate to the node tree, you can drag out the gripper down here. As you can see, it does not matter whether you select a layer in the layer stack or in the node tree. It's the same action. That being said, the layer stack always shows the layers of any selected node. Right now, all these layers are layers of our source QuickTime node up here. However, I can also select the QuickTime node of the clip that we're feeding onto a layer here and add layers to that node, like such. If at some point the node tree becomes too crowded, I can either collapse the layers of any given node, like this, or change the viewing settings in the user preferences down here to show only layers that have a fill or matte, or no layers at all. You might need to swipe the node tree out and back in again to update the view after changing this setting. The latter makes sense if you want to use the node tree to strictly navigate nodes and the layer stack to navigate layers on any given node that is selected in the node tree. Speaking of which, as you can see, the viewport always shows whichever node is selected, not necessarily the overall output of our composite, which is the top-level node. This is important as it impacts what's being seen on the LED wall in a virtual production environment. To prevent the output to the LED wall from changing, you can do three things. The most important one is to go to the Settings menu, Monitors, and make sure that Top View is enabled. This will ensure that Live FX always outputs the complete composite. If you also need the viewport to always show the overall result, you can lock it by selecting the top-level node first and then locking your viewport to that node. Now the viewport will always show the overall result, while the menus down here relate to the selected node in the node tree, which you can also easily see by the node menu changing accordingly. The last option, which can also come in handy, is to use Dual View, hotkey D. Now the right side will always show the overall output of our shot composite, while the left side will always show the selected node. Let's go back to the main shot node at the top and now add a plugin on top as opposed to a layer. What we can see now is that our entire composite shot is fed into the new plugin node up here. And as you can see, if I select one node versus the other, I get different parameters in the node menu. Now, the node tree is not only for navigating, but can also be used to composite. Let's say I want to add the clip we added onto a layer down here to another layer. I can simply drag the node, hover over a layer, and choose whether I want to add it to the fill or matte input of that layer. It is the very same action as selecting the target layer here and having the Fill Matte menu open, then dragging the clip node from the node tree into the fill field here. The important thing to check is this button down here. When it is disabled, Live FX will not create an actual copy of the node, but rather a reference to it. The advantage is that it saves on resources. This way, the original clip only gets decoded once, and the grade applied on it also only needs to get processed once. The reference is being indicated by a blue border and a dotted line between the nodes. You can easily verify by adding a simple grade to one of the two. As you can see, the other one gets it as well. Note that the referencing only applies to source clip nodes. Grading any subsequent node will remain individual. If I insert a nest node here, I can color grade that however I want without the grade appearing on the other branch. Let me undo all this real quick. Now, if, however, you want the other one to be a copy, make sure to enable the C button down here and then create the copy. Since we already created the branch, let me just grab the clip again, hover over the reference node, and choose to replace the node instead. Done. If we now add a grade to one of them, it will not automatically appear on the other. That being said, usually the more resource-saving way to go is via referencing a source shot and using a nest node to apply any specific grades, like shown before. The last menu to look at is the Live FX menu over here. In the Setup tab, we can first and foremost dial in the shot length and set a global timecode provider for the shot. We also have access to various important menus like the Livelinks panel, the Stage Manager, and more. Particularly helpful is the Performance Monitor, which you can also trigger via hotkey Ctrl F1 or Command F1 on the Mac. The Quick Paths dropdown allows us to quickly add pre-configured elements to our composite, like a light or green card. In the Record tab, we can dial in options to record a shot. If we were not playing a shot from disk but had any kind of live capture node involved in our setup, we would be shown a record button to record the current composite, including all its metadata. Now, how about we create an actual projection composition? We could do this manually by adding the corresponding plugin nodes via the plugin browser and live linking everything by hand. However, Live FX offers a much more elegant way. Let's jump back to the Construct tab and hit the Projection Setup button. First thing to do in here is to select a stage. To better show you what that entails let me open the Stage Manager. In here, I can save multiple different stages, or stage configurations. A stage is simply an arrangement of one or more LED walls in 3D space. The gizmo you can see here is the world origin point as agreed upon with the camera tracking solution of choice. Every wall in our stage is placed in relation to this world origin point. You can create walls as well as floor and ceiling screens right here in Live FX. For more advanced shapes, it allows you to import OBJ mesh files. Once configured, make sure to enable your stage of choice as the active stage. The other main function the Stage Manager has is to map the image output to the LED processes, which you can do here in the Mapper tab. The first drop-down lets us decide whether we want to map walls onto display canvases or the other way around. If you're using NVIDIA Mosaic, where multiple physical outputs are merged together into one big virtual monitor output, the Mosaic button here lets you map multiple walls, from the left side over here, onto a single output. In our case, however, we only have a single wall, and that is mapped nicely to our single dual-head output. Of course, this mapping has to correspond with the tile mapping inside the LED processor. You can always use the preview function up here to check whether all your tiles are mapped correctly. Back to our projection setup wizard. Next, let's drop in one of our 360 clips. In this particular case, the clips do ship with the corresponding metadata for Live FX to automatically detect that these are in fact 360 equirectangular clips. So no need to tell Live FX manually what type of media this is. It is already set correctly. Next, we can choose our preferred projection type, spherical in this case. Our camera profile, which contains sensor size, lens distortion parameters and other things, as well as our camera tracking solution, Intel RealSense in this case. I'll also enable the frustum highlight option and hit the Create button. And we're back inside the Live FX tab. A quick look into the node tree shows us the source QuickTime node that is being piped into the EQ to wall node up here. Also present are two layers which get the frustum to wall node fed into their respective matte field. As you can see, in one instance we're using the alpha channel of the frustum to wall node, and in the other we're using the inverted alpha. This allows us to color grade the inner and outer frustum separately by applying a grade to either layer. Let me select the EQ to wall node again. In the node menu, we can see that the Link to Stage Manager option is enabled. The Projection Setup Wizard has done this for us. Were this option disabled, we could load an OBJ file directly into this node, independent from what is set up in the Stage Manager. However, you rarely want that. Same goes for the camera position. We could dial in a specific camera position for this node. However, it's typically much more convenient to simply have it linked to the shot camera, which is set up here in the camera menu. Opening the Stage Manager via the right-click menu, we can see that our camera apparently sits on the floor, which explains the rather strange display here. This is because my RealSense tracker has no idea where it is in the room right now, so I'll just manually dial in a height of 1.5 meters for the time being. While the tracking data should stay unaffected on the right side, I'm using the left side controls to dial in any kind of global offset to the tracking data. And, as we can see in the Stage Manager, our camera is now in a much more reasonable position. Let me quickly explain the flow of data here. Starting with the LiveLinks panel. In here, we can find all and any supported camera tracking solutions, as well as our Unreal LiveLink and OSC sender and receiver. Selecting the Intel RealSense tracker will show us the incoming tracking data here. If we hit the Apply button up here, the tracking data will get live linked to the shot camera of the current selected node. Fortunately, the Projection Setup Wizard has also done this for us already, as you can see here. The shot camera's XYZ position and pan tilt roll parameters are moving according to the tracking data. To even further verify this, we can open the animation editor by clicking the link button here and displaying all these parameters. If we wanted to, we could assign different incoming live links to each parameter and even modify the data by choosing one of these filters or adding a delay. Next in line are then the current node's controls. As you will remember, we had enabled the Link to Shot Camera option here. So now our projection node, which takes care of the spherical projection, will receive its camera tracking data straight from the shot camera, which in turn receives it straight from the live linked Intel RealSense tracker. The same applies to the frustum to wall node down here. It also has the link to shot camera option enabled. However, going to the camera menu of this node, we must realize that the camera is in fact disabled. So where is the node getting its tracking info from? Fairly straightforward, and very important to know. If the camera in any node is disabled, it will automatically inherit the camera parameters from its parent node, which is the EQ to wall node up here. If we were to activate the camera of the frustum to wall node, it would not have any connection to the parent node anymore and not move anymore. We would now need to live link it separately to our camera tracker by going to the live links panel and, with the frustum to wall node selected, hit the apply button here. This can make sense in certain scenarios, but most of the time what you want is a single point of configuration for the shot camera, which then ripples down through all parts of the composite. Now, before we end this chapter on the Live FX tab, one last menu we need to study, the Settings menu. In here you'll find 4 menus, the General menu in which I want to highlight just a few features. The VSync option, which should be enabled if you're going out the GPU to the LED processor. In this scenario, the Live FX workstation does not need to be gen-locked, but it is essential that the vertical sync is enabled. Otherwise, you might see tearing on the wall. Next, you can set the playback speed to free run and check how fast Live FX can play the media with all of the grades and composite applied by checking the performance monitor. Note that Live FX can only go as fast as it can if it is not limited by the frame rate of any Video I/O device. This brings me to the Video I/O menu, which is the same as the one from the startup screen, just accessible from inside the project as well. The Monitors menu lists all monitor outputs, our dual head, as well as any Video I/O output. In here, we can tag any output with a color space and transfer function. Live FX will compare these with the color space and transfer function tags of the underlying shot, to be found here in the Media menu. If the two differ, Live FX will do a transform from shot to target display. If set to source, no transform whatsoever happens. We can also load a calibration LUT into any of our display outputs, for instance created from our OpenVPCal implementation. To the far right, we have the already mentioned top view option and also the ability to completely switch off any image output from Live FX. Also important is the Keep Image option, which will freeze the last frame when going back to the Construct tab instead of showing the Assimilate logo on the wall. In the Video Format tab, we can do manual positioning of image content on any given display output. However, this is also something that is taken care of by the Stage Manager in most cases. The last 2 menus in here are our Guides and the Profile menu. Whenever a certain format or composite is not playing real time, running a profile can give you a clue as to where the bottleneck is with regards to your underlying hardware. Okay, back to the Construct tab, and let's now play a simple shot without any projection mapping going on. Time to look at the Stage Lights tab. The Stage Lights tab is really simple and easy to operate. On the left side, we have the Fixture stack, which lists all and any light that we create. Creating lights can be done in an automated way by importing a GDTF template or adding a fixture from the Open Fixture library. Of course, you can also manually patch out a light as you see fit. Live FX also supports video fixtures, which require an actual image sent to an LED processor as opposed to DMX protocol. Then down here we have 4 simple menus. The Protocols menu lets us decide how we want to communicate with our lights. USB to DMX interfaces, ArtNet, or streaming ACN. Also, the video fixture layout can be configured in here. The Fixture menu corresponds to the selected fixture in the Fixture stack. It starts with the patching of DMX channels according to the selected profile on the fixture. For segmented or multi-pixel fixtures, we can tell Live FX how many pixels the fixture has and which channels should be repeated to control each individual pixel. In the Color Sampling tab, we can tell Live FX what the exact order of those pixels is and how many rows and columns of pixels the fixture has. As you can see, any fixture is represented by a sample box here on the image. We can move, size, and rotate the sample box any which way we like. Doing so in the viewport will automatically adjust the numeric boxes down here. Live FX will sample the content for every sample cell inside the box, average it, and then send it down DMX to the fixture to accurately reflect the image content in this area for every frame played. We can also fade against a solid color, flip-flop the fixture, and change the sample filter. Linear is more coarse but saves a lot on performance, where a filter like Langchas is rather smooth but requires a few more hardware resources. Of course, any fixture can be color graded on its own, and we can even configure animations and link them to any DMX channel. Last but not least, the Color Transform tab. In here, we can tell Live FX whether the fixture operates in a certain color space. Same as we've seen before with the display color management, Live FX will look at the clip's color space and transfer function tags here in the media menu. And if those differ from the fixture's color space and transfer function tags, do a transform from one to the other. Alternatively, we can also load a lookup table onto the fixture or even dial in our own RGB matrix and define the CIE XY range. The config menu features a couple of self-explanatory settings for the UI. The two most important settings in here are, however, the first and the last one. Store fixture settings per shot needs to be enabled not only in order to have different fixture configurations and layouts for different scenes, but also to be able to create animations for any DMX channel. If we want to hook up a lighting console in order to control the virtual fixtures inside Live FX, we need to enable SACN input here in the protocols menu and also lighting console input over here. The patcher window then allows us to patch any incoming DMX channels from the console to the virtual fixtures, as well as generic functions like the color grading of the underlying image or playback control. On to the mixer menu. This is a comprehensive merge of the fixture stack and the fixture menu. As you can see, it lists all the fixtures, allows to dim, enable and disable, and color grade them. Other functions of the fixture can be found via this button. In case you do not have a lighting console handy, you can bring up the internal web server via this QR code and access it on a tablet, for instance, to dial in lighting directly on the stage and away from the Live FX workstation together with the DOP. Of course, any configuration in the Stage Lights tab can be exported and imported via the buttons down here. Sampling of all fixtures can be paused here without pausing playback of the shot itself. And the DMX RAW viewer here lets us analyze DMX channels of any given universe. This is very helpful for troubleshooting whenever a light is not behaving as it should. This is it for an introductory overview of Live FX for anything related to virtual production, green screen, and image-based lighting. Please see our in-depth tutorials and tutorial playlists for projection mapping, green screen, and image-based lighting as well to dive in deeper into all possibilities that Live FX Studio offers for virtual production. See you there.